Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the second day of the Global MCBK 2022 meeting. I'm Chuck Friedman. I'm the chair of the Department of Learning Health Sciences at the University of Michigan. I'm accompanied here by Philip Scott. Philip, introduce yourself just briefly.
Thanks, Chuck. Yeah, so Philip Scott, I'm co-chair of the MCBK UK group, and I'm a program director at the University of Wales, Trinity St David.
And the third co-chair, thank you, Philip, of MCBK 2022 is Wendy Chapman of the University of Melbourne in Australia. So truly, this is a global meeting. Day two will cover several things, but first of all, I need to make an announcement about a schedule change for this morning's meeting. This meeting was originally going to be 3 hours long, and we were going to have 2 rounds of huddles, dividing the participants according to their preferences into 11 groups in 11 different rooms, and we were going to do this twice in 2 successive 45-minute sessions. We've decided to only do this once, so we will have 1 huddle session, and consequently, this second day of the meeting, both session 1, which is happening now, and session 2, which will happen later, will be 3-hour sessions. And you can see here in the red rectangle the part of the meeting that's changing, and you'll see the now inclusive times on a 24-hour notation of the sessions in day 2. So looking at the leftmost column of the material inside the red rectangle, you see session 1, July 13th, which is today. If you are in the Pacific time zone of the US and Canada, the session has just started at 6 a.m. and will run until 9. In Eastern time, it's 9 a.m. And the session will run until noon. In Brazil and Argentina, it's 10 a.m. The session will run to 1 p.m. In the UK, the session started at 2 p.m. and will run until 5. In Central Europe, the session started at 3 p.m. and will run until 6. And in Saudi Arabia, the session started at 4 and will run until 7 p.m. Session 2, which happens later, is modified accordingly. So let me move now to what is going to happen in the next 45 minutes. Following this opening, what is going to be happening in the next 30 minutes. Following this opening, we will hear a wonderful plenary from Sir Dr. Aziz Sheikh, recently knighted from the University of Edinburgh in the UK. We will then go directly into our 11 parallel huddles, and then we will have a closing session for MCBK 22 session 1. So immediately, we're going to present to you some material that is actually going to be preliminary to our discussion about details of making MCBK a global community, which will conclude our work together this morning. And what we're going to do for this preliminary is review MCBK in the US and the UK. And as I said yesterday, if you were here yesterday, and I hope you were, it is really the parallel development of MCBK in the US and the UK that has given rise to this concept of making MCBK a truly global community. So I showed this slide yesterday. This review just summarizes the 5-year history of meetings of MCBK, going back to an organizing meeting in 2017, 2 open in-person meetings at the NIH in Bethesda, Maryland in the USA, 2018 and 2019, the UK inaugural meeting of MCBK UK in 2019, and John Fox's presentation from that meeting is illustrated here. 2 open virtual meetings in 2020 and 2021 because of COVID, and of course this took us to the meeting we are attending today, the virtual global meeting 2022. This slide is also a repeat from yesterday that summarizes the things that MCBK has accomplished so far. Those of us who work closely with MCBK and are part of the leadership, and it's a broadly dispersed leadership of it, believe that what we've accomplished includes a community bound by the manifesto, the document that was created and made into a consensus document in 2018. We believe that there is interest in MCBK that has spread around the world, and some of the evidence for this is that 41 countries are represented in the participants who registered for this meeting. There is a relationship now between MCBK and the Learning Health Systems Journal, and I'll say more about that in a moment. The MCBK Journal, the Learning Health Systems Journal has through this relationship become a focus for sharing of knowledge and best practices that are introduced at the annual meeting. The abstracts are published in the journal from 2019, 2020, and 2021, and the abstracts for 2022 will be published in the journal again. There have been several deliverables from MCBK. A few of them are portrayed here. One is a very important paper with lead author Brian Alper and many co-authors that details categories of CBK metadata that will be important to engender trust in digital knowledge objects and related infrastructure. There is a white paper from the British Computer Society. You'll hear a little bit more about that in just a few minutes from Philip. And among the other papers that have been published is a very informative study of CBK repositories, also published in the Learning Health Systems Journal. So I'll take a little detour here, but I think it's an important detour to talk about the Learning Health Systems Journal and to encourage you, if you are interested in MCBK, because Learning Health Systems is the official journal of MCBK, to submit your work to this journal. Learning Health Systems is edited at the University of Michigan, but published very ably by John Wiley and Sons, consistent with the values of MCBK. This is a fully open access and online journal. Articles, once they are accepted and formatted for publication, become immediately available to anyone with access to the internet immediately. The articles are all in PDF form. There is no paper version of this journal, which I think is also consistent with the values of MCBK. This is a very rigorous journal. The peer review is extremely rigorous, and I believe the articles that find their way into publication are of very, very high quality. We have yet to publish a paper as submitted. Every single article submitted to the journal has been revised at least once, and I hope you all agree with me that this is an important step in being sure that the articles that are published are of high quality that benefits from the review. This is no longer a new journal. It's now publishing volume 6, and as we move into proximity to 2023, it will soon be publishing volume 7, and of course a lot of the papers submitted now will appear next year in volume 7. Just a few points about the growth of the journal and how articles are discovered and accessed. The journal is widely indexed in PubMed, Scopus, Google Scholar, Web of Science, the Emerging Science Citation Index, and the ACM Digital Library. Papers that are published in the journal are very findable, going back to the FAIR principles. In addition, because we have access to several mailing lists, including a mailing list of about 2,200 people who in various ways have shown interest in the journal, an electronic table of contents for each quarterly issue is pushed directly to about 6,000 recipients by email. And if you look in the upper right, you will see an index of the growth of the journal. In 2021, more than 100,000 articles from the journal were downloaded. That is in 2021 alone. And you see from the slope of the line the growth of the journal in terms of the annual article downloads beginning in 2017. The top 10 downloading countries and regions, as you see here in the lower right, speaks to the fact that, and I think it is a fact, that this has become truly an international journal, and as such is very consistent with our hope that MCBK can become a global entity over the next few years. So a few specifics about MCBK US, and we're calling the work on MCBK in the US, MCBK US now, in anticipation of becoming, of MCBK itself overall becoming an international global movement. And in the US, I think it's important to emphasize that MCBK US is a movement, not an organization. The membership is informal. The governance, while it exists, is also fairly informal. We do have a steering committee, which is a very valuable and important part of MCBK US, but it doesn't work under Robert's rules, and there are no organizational bylaws at the moment, reflecting the fact that it's a movement, not an organization. MCBK US has had annual meetings, and in fact, MCBK US will have a meeting later this month that is separate from the global meeting, and for people in the US, a supplement to it. A lot of the work of MCBK US is done through three work groups, I should say, each of which has two co-chairs who are listed here. We have a technical standards and infrastructure work group that is co-chaired by Bruce Bray and Jamie McCusker. We very much appreciate their efforts. A trust and policy work group co-chaired by Blackford Middleton and Jody Platt, and a sustainability work group that is co-chaired by Jerry Perry and Terry Wheeler. Actually, it's the Sustainability and Inclusion Work Group. I left the inclusion word out of the title of that work group. I'm not going to dwell on these charters of the three work groups, but I will display them here very quickly. The Trust and Policy Work Group is chartered to understand the current CBK landscape as it relates to trust, governance, and policy, define roles and opportunities for the community to promote transparency and trust, develop model governance structures, and other activities. The Sustainability and Inclusion Work Group has a charter that includes 8 specific items: engagement of stakeholders, building momentum through communication strategies, discern where there are vulnerabilities or gaps in knowledge and communication. More generally, if you read down, understand the MCBK landscape. So this slide, which illustrates the 8 components of this work group charter, I think paints a picture of what the Sustainability and Inclusion Work Group is about. And then there's a technical standards and infrastructure work group. We did at the outset have separate work groups for technical standards and infrastructure. We realized about 18 months ago that the work of what had been heretofore two separate work groups on standards and infrastructure had elements which were so closely related to one another that it made all the sense in the world to combine these two work groups into one. There are 4 components to its charter, and I've highlighted in red because of the publication that came out recently about metadata categories that the first component here of the infrastructure for this work group, of the charter for this work group, is to develop these prototype standards for computable knowledge representation with emphasis on metadata. They are also chartered to, for example, identify and describe the framework components necessary to move CBK from generation into practice through a variety of steps that are familiar to people who work with information technology. So what is the status of MCBK US? It's a journey. We've been on this journey for 5 years, but I believe we are making steady progress. We are facing some challenges that I hope we might discuss in more detail in the closing session later in this meeting. One of them is what I call data obsession. We see particularly in the policies of government agencies, and I know this firsthand from my own experience working in the government, that there is a almost exclusive emphasis in government programs and government-sponsored programs with making data fair. And this is to the absence of what those of us in MCBK consider equally important, and that is making knowledge fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And in many discussions which start out with a focus on knowledge, they have a tendency to veer in the direction of data, and it's a viewpoint that MCBK is trying to change. We're trying to bring interest in knowledge to the same level as interest in data. COVID-19 has slowed everything down. I won't dwell on that. There is a lack of funding for infrastructure that raises challenges that we all face trying to get this work funded, but we've made some progress. We hope in future months and years to increase the coordination across our 3 work groups. We are hoping also to make greater emphasis on CBK use cases supporting research and education in addition to healthcare. And as MCBK goes global, which we are very much hoping it will, we are hoping to derive energy and ideas in the US from other countries with different cultures, health systems, and perspectives. So now I'd like to turn things over to Philip, who will give us an overview of MCBK in the UK. Philip?
Thank you very much, Chuck. So, in the overview of MCBK in the UK, I want to tell you a bit more about our inaugural meeting back in 2019 and how that led on to where we are now. I'm going to dwell a bit on our specific collaboration with the National Institute of Health and Care Excellence, NICE, which I'm sure you're familiar with as the UK source of authoritative clinical guidelines. And then, as Chuck alluded to, the recently published BCS white paper. So moving on to the 2019 meeting, this was an initiative that started with myself and Jeremy Wyatt, who was our keynote speaker yesterday. And we were bringing together a multi-stakeholder group. And so we reached out to organisations such as BCS, where I'm the chair of the Health and Care Group, the Faculty of Clinical Informatics, where Jeremy is co-chair of the Artificial Intelligence Group, and other colleagues such as HR7 UK. Obviously, there's a clear alignment with standards, as Chuck has alluded to, with the US work groups. And also there was a specific academic project called the Learning Healthcare Project out of Newcastle University. So with the financial support from the organisations listed, we were able to hold this first meeting in central London, and we were oversubscribed. We could only fit 65 people into the room, and we had a very full house, a very rich discussion. And I've listed there some of the attendees. So I've already mentioned NICE, and in fact, it's worth just pausing to reflect that NICE has really changed its culture over the last few years. NICE has been well known for many years for its rigorous assessment of systematic reviews and publication of these into recommendations and best practice. But in recent years has really begun to realise that you can't just publish great long PDFs, that it does not change the world. And that's increasingly been seen. The fact that we had, I think, about 9 different people from NICE, various levels of seniority and speciality, attending that meeting, I think was really quite a turning point in their thinking about digital services. And I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. We also had a number of people there from NHS Digital. That organisation is in the process of being wound up and rolled into NHS England. So that's what happens in the NHS in the UK. It's a perennial reorganisation because it's a political animal, unfortunately, and of course is separated across the 4 countries of the UK. We have separate NHS governance and funding structures in England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. And of course, given again the political reality, they strive to make each other as different as possible, and especially different to England. So the other organisations involved, Health Education England, which has responsibility for commissioning the clinical education for professional training. They are interested in terms of the culture change that is necessary to bring about the changes we're talking about with MCBK. Also NHS Scotland, who, if you were here for the lightning talks yesterday, you will have heard from Anne Wales, who's been leading the Right Decision Service. And they've been making some really interesting steps forward, both in terms of kind of traditional decision support, but also moving more in the direction of the MCBK vision. We had representations from Open Clinical. We've heard a couple of times John Fox's name mentioned, who sadly passed away recently. And really the richness and depth of his experience has made an important contribution, and it was great to have him as part of that opening conversation. I've mentioned HR7 UK, and again, if you were in the late session yesterday, you will have heard from Graham Grieve, who was talking about the development of the fire standard and the way in which the more recent developments, such as clinical quality language and clinical practice guidelines on fire, those are very important areas of development which we're tracking closely and hoping to get more involved with over time. We also had medical publishers because, of course, at the moment, the business model of medical publishers is publishing journals, and that clearly needs to move to publishing knowledge objects. A number of academics were there, and we also had some reasonable representation from the health IT industry. So moving on from that, we published all the videos. We had funding to record everything, and it's there on YouTube. You can see each of the talks. We wrote up an overview as an editorial, and several of the presenters wrote up their talks as articles in the special issue of BMJ Health and Care Informatics that's linked here. And so then what happened was that the steering group of that conference became an overall MCBK UK steering group. We could see that this wasn't just a one-off discussion. There is sustained interest to move forward. And so we put together a terms of reference and constituted this as a joint working group of the BCS and the FCI. So a bit more about NICE. Well, in their 5-year strategy, they've now explicitly recognised that they need to move from words to data. Unfortunately, they haven't said computerable knowledge, but they're moving in the right direction. And having more modular recommendations that are in an interactive digital format. And so more recently, they set up a content advisory board to help it move towards those aims. And so I was invited to be a member of that and proposed that we should turn this into something concrete by running a collaborathon or kind of hack day that would try out different kinds of computable standards for implementing computable knowledge. And so we're now at the detailed planning stage, and we're planning events in November this year and February next year, and we're going to be concentrating on using FHIR, CQL, and BPM Plus representations of knowledge. So the other thing just to tell you about in the UK is the white paper that we published recently. If we could go on to the next slide, please. So here's a link to that. And we really published this to kind of aid communication, because MCBK is somewhat of a challenging concept, and the acronym, if you're not familiar with what it's all about, can be a bit off-putting. So we wanted to really get to what this is all about in practical terms. So we commissioned a writer to do some interviews and put the first draft together, which was then edited by myself and Jeremy. And we published this on the 21st of June along with a press release, and I'm very pleased to say we've had good coverage in the media. We've had 13 media mentions altogether. And our next follow-on activity that we're looking to do is again reaching out to the political community. We already have connections obviously with the health departments in the 4 UK nations, but there's also the broader political representation of members of parliament. And in the UK, we have what are called all-party parliamentary groups, where there's cross-party discussion about topics of interest, such as health. And in fact, there is one about library services, which is the most natural connection for us. And that's operated through one of our professional groups called CILIP, which is the professional body for libraries, and they have a particular specialist group for healthcare librarians. So we're working with them, and also with them, we're bringing together a workshop to bring other industries together. So outside of healthcare, we're reaching out, for example, to the defence industry, various other government agencies and various other private sector fields to see if we can compare notes in terms of where we are with biomedical computable knowledge and compare that with how things have been developing in other fields where knowledge is intensive and is required to be computable. So I think that brings us to the end of the overview of UK activity. So very pleased to hand back to Chuck to take us forward.
Thank you so much, Philip, for that summary. I hope the juxtaposition of the US activity and the UK activity has given you a sense of the potential for MCBK as a global organization and the synergy that could result from national, continental, or other large-scale chapters working together and sharing their advice and their learnings.